He could feel the heat of the fire coming through the deck. Then suddenly he lacked the strength to move. He shook his head. He knew he wasn't going to make it out. "Rose," he said, whispering the name of his wife. "Rose." And just before he let himself be sucked into the swirling blackness, he managed to conjure her face into his dying brain. Captain Jacob Miller sat down in his swivel chair on the Concorde's navigation bridge. The Concorde, CVA-60, an 80,000-ton aircraft carrier, was steaming into the eastern Mediterranean toward the Israeli port of Haifa, ostensibly for a courtesy call, but really to deliver a dozen Crusader jet fighters to the Israeli Air Force. Though the delivery was a top-secret operation, the Concorde and her two escorts, the D.D. Holmes and the Murray, were constantly shadowed by either Russian submarines or Tu-95s, turboprop-driven long-range bombers used mainly for anti-submarine and reconnaissance operations. Since 1800, the radar and the sonar had reported nothing on their screens. But they were steaming only 50 miles off the Egyptian coast, and Jacob was almost sure that Egyptian fighters would attempt to make a few low-level passes at his ship before they reached Israeli waters. To prevent that, he had 4 fighters flying cap at 20,000 feet that could be vectored onto any bogey by the ship's tactical air controller. Jacob had recently turned 50 and had taken command of the Concorde 6 weeks before in Norfolk, the ship's home port. This was the first time in his career that he had commanded an aircraft carrier. It was a necessary step on the way to making flag rank, and perhaps somewhere up ahead in the future, the real possibility of becoming the Chief of Naval Operations. Having fought in World War II and in the Korean War, he certainly had the combat experience. He wasn't just a paper pusher. He almost smiled at his own thought. There were dozens of officers with the same qualifications. Whether he made C&O or not was up to the fates and to politics, from which even the Navy couldn't escape. Jacob had come onto the bridge because he wasn't sleepy, though it was almost time for the mid-watch, and because it was his habit to visit the bridge just before turning in. Even as he noted the escorting D.D. Holmes on the starboard side and Murray on the port, Jacob thought about the letter he'd finished writing to his sister Miriam before he had come to the bridge. Her letter had been delivered aboard by a carrier-on-board delivery aircraft the day before. Despite the geographic distances that separated them, theirs had always been a close brother-sister relationship, which had been made even closer when Miriam had married Tony Trapasso, a friend of Jacob's. Tony, according to Miriam's letter, was on another trip to Saigon, with his usual stops in Hong Kong and Tokyo. The most disturbing portion of the letter was Miriam's comment that their mother, now in her late 80s, had to be put into a nursing home. Jacob was well aware that the best of them, and his mother was in the very best in the city, was nothing more than a holding place for the elderly before they died. He'd told his sister that he would foot the entire bill, and in addition, he would pay for their mother to have 24-hour nursing care. The rest of his letter consisted of chit-chat about his son, Simon, who was at Annapolis, and her son, Michael, and daughter, Ruth. Mike was pre-engineering in Pennsylvania State and had joined the NROTC, and Ruth was a senior in high school and thinking about going to Vassar. Jacob had also written that he'd run into their mutual friend Warren Troost, who, like himself, was a captain, though senior to him, and whose son was also at Annapolis. Having mentally gone over what he had written to his sister and being satisfied with it, Jacob filled his pipe, lit it, and, smoking contentedly, thought about the events of the day. The ship's ETA in port was 0800 the next morning, and by 1000 the American ambassador and his party, which included the Deputy Prime Minister, the Admiral of the Navy, and several of his aides, would come aboard for a reception and tour of the ship. Jacob shifted his position and was about to return to his sea cabin when the watch officer, coming up behind him, said in a tight voice, "Captain, we have a fire in No. 2 main." At the same instant, the fire bell sounded 3 times, indicating a fire in the aft section of the ship. Jacob winced, then ordered, "Sound fire quarters and notify damage control central." Almost immediately, the klaxon began to blare. As soon as it was silent, the watch officer came on the 1MC. "All hands."